Um, we got Republicans are quietly rigging the election maps to ensure to ensure permanent rule. Now they'll deny it and say that not what they're doing, but they are. The past decade in Ohio shows how bad it can get and how quickly, despite the state's voters often swinging Democratic. 75% of its congressional delegates are Republican. The long-term health of American democracy is in peril to a degree far worse than people can imagine, but not where most people are looking to. Now, while many eyes go to Washington D.C. on or Mar-a-Lago, the attack on democracy is actually most concentrated and coordinated in state capitals, whether it's gerrymandering or voter suppression or attacks on offices that provide the needed checks and balances. The states have become widely undemocratic as somebody outlined in their book, Laboratories of Autocracy. Autocracy. The consequences of this anti-democratic movement are only going to get worse. The past decade in Ohio, where people had served, where somebody had served in recent years as chair of the state Democratic Party, it shows how bad one can get and how quickly. When Faux News called Ohio for Barack Obama in 2012, it meant he'd be president for another term. Ohio's Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown also won handedly that night, but how did these victories in America's bellwether state translate at the congressional level? Not at all. Even though it was Democratic in 2012, a state that only 4 years ago had sent 10 Democrats to the U.S. House of Representatives and eight Republicans, now sent 12 Republicans to the House and only 4 Democrats. And 2014 was a big year for the Republicans anyway. They won decisively for what they call statewide offices. The congressional delegation was 12-4 in 2016, and another Republican year, 12-4. But in 2018, Sherrod Brown won again, this time by 7 points. And many of his voters also voted for a Democrat running for the House. In all, 41% of Ohioans cast a vote for the Democratic candidate for the House, while 52% voted for the Republican. And what was the outcome of that 52-47 split for a House congressional delegation? 12-4 again, 75% Republican. 2020, 12-4 again. And so for an entire decade, whether Ohio voters tilted to Democratic or to Republican or a toss-up when it came to Congress, nothing changed. And the makeup was the same exact 12-4 split, no matter how the voters voted. In the world's oldest democracy, the voters basically didn't matter. And why is that? Because in Ohio, in Ohio back in 2011, in a secret hotel room that they called the bunker, a small group of partisan insiders designed the House district maps to guarantee the outcome of all 90 U.S. House elections that were to follow in the coming decade, and they proved to be so good at their work that they got all 90 elections that right. It's a success rate in rigging election outcomes amid the appearance of a democratic process that Vladimir Putin would admire. Sadly, Ohio isn't alone. Numerous other American states experienced the same decade of guaranteed outcomes for both their U.S. House delegations and their state-level legislators. In some cases, even when a majority of voters voted for one party to be in charge, the rigged districts mean that the losing party remained in charge. In Michigan in 2018, voters chose Democrats over Republicans for their state house by 52% to 47. Nevertheless, this led to a Republican majority in that state house of 58-52. And in Wisconsin, losing the popular vote for the state house across the state by 54-45 gave Republicans a 63-36 supermajority in that state house. And that would truly impress a foreign autocrat, a system locking the minority into power despite a clear mandate by the voters that they wanted the opposite. The prime culprits behind all this election rigging are the state houses themselves, mostly anonymous elected officials who few voters know, but who wield far more power than most Americans appreciate. And that includes the power to draw the district lines of both federal and state representatives in their own districts, as well as establishing most of the other rules of how elections are run, including how presidential electors are divided up. But it's all going to get worse. And fast forward to now. Outraged by a decade of rigged elections, citizens in Ohio and other states took action to change the process of how lines are drawn. And some opted for independent districting commissions in Ohio. And more than 70% of the voters amended the Ohio Constitution, and twice to add clear guidelines to curb the type of extreme partisan districting that led to a decade without democracy. And how have those in charge responded? And knowing that fair districts and robust democracy threaten their grip on power, the legislative leaders are simply ignoring the new rules, defying them. In fact, the first map that they have proposed here in Ohio would guarantee an astonishing 13-2 map. Knowing full well that Ohio's partisan breakdown would be best reflected by an 8-7 map. Despite the new rules, key urban counties are now being split 3 ways rather than 2 to achieve that outrageous result. So now, not only are these unknown politicians, not only are these unknown politicians willing to rig elections, they are willing to defy their own state constitution, and the voted will of more than 70% of their own population to get this done. As sad as as bad as this example is, it's only one of the many fronts that are in a nationwide attack on democracy. And locked into power in these state houses are a generation of politicians who themselves largely got their absent and true democracy because they also benefited from the rigged maps. So who are now doing all they can to maintain that power? And one thing I know for sure is the greatest threat to their the one thing I know for sure is the greatest threat to their hold on power is a robust democracy. And since they write the rules, they have the ability to hold that risk at bay. And though gerrymandering, voter suppression, and cracking down on protests, attacking independent courts and officials that get in the way, and other measures, and they're taking all these actions and more across the country right now. The truth is, if another country were taking all these steps, we call it for what it is: an attack on democracy itself, a descent toward autocracy. But because it's happening in our own state capitals, we too often treat it with less urgency, and this fucking needs to end. And it's time to go on the offense for democracy at the state level every year, beginning fucking now. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RVW King, and also hit the notification bell so that you get notified when the new video comes out, and thanks for listening.